Good afternoon, Thursday, August 13th. I'm going to title this YouTube Climbing Jacob's Ladder, just like that old song we would sing sometimes. I've been thinking about this what I'm going to share today quite a bit. It's the product of the last month of mulling some stuff around. And I think it started off. I've made reference to this. It started off with an audio clip that I was sent from a Colombian pastor prophesying to all the churches, which we'll get into in a second. But it was basically a doom and gloom message, and better straighten up or else. And in times like these, where we've been going through most unusual situation for those of our time, all the way through history, there have been these kind of grand events. But in times like these, it's like the ground gets suddenly fertile for messages that in other times wouldn't really affect. And I think this is one of those times. And there's quite a few prophecies running around now on YouTube that somebody said it's a mob waiting to happen, that can throw you into confusion. If probably a lot of you aren't even given to looking at that kind of stuff on YouTube, and in a sense, more power to you. But it's for certain. I bet most of you have probably heard of these prophecies of a pastor out of Kentucky Kentucky, I think. But pretty much the end is here, and literally you better get guns and so on. And his validity is in that he apparently saw much of what is going on and has witnesses to that in a much prior date, last year, the end of last year. Okay, be that as it may. What do we do? I imagine all of you have had at least the experience of being in the presence of two people arguing theology, or maybe you were one of them, and you're dealing with somebody who's obviously wrong, but it's so that you can't convince them. And they have some points, but you have so many more. And trying to navigate those kind of waters of great contradictions. And you'll even get to some impasses where you want to say, okay, well, yeah, this is right, but that's right too. And I don't know why they don't go together, and so on. How do you navigate those waters? And that's what I want to touch on today. And I'll just, I'm a slow learner, but when I get it, it doesn't mean I can't lose it. And I may have to learn it again. They used to say that training an ox was really laborious and slow because they were slow to learn. But once they had it, it was forever. Whereas a mule could pick up on stuff just like that, and he would know what to do right away. But you had to teach him. You had to teach him all over again every other month. I don't think that's quite true, but so I want to address this idea of how do we determine truth? How do we pick out which side is right? How do we know what prophecy is of God and which one is not? And so on. There's so many key issues, headliners going on in our day that you feel compelled to take a side, Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative. You feel compelled. And people want you to take it. They want to be able to label you. And very often it reminds me of when Joshua was outside of Jericho and he runs into the angel of God, and impudent the impudent human says to the angel of God, "Are you for us or against us?" And the angel says, "Neither. I'm actually the captain of the hosts of Israel." And Joshua's, a little light goes on and he's going, I thought that's who I was. Guess I've been replaced. But we narrow things down to black or white, A or B, and God's got a whole different alphabet He's dealing with sometimes. So you can get on, and you don't have to get on there. Just YouTube just presents such an easy mode by which differences can be aired. It used to all have to be pretty much in writing, and there were all through the church history there has been. Um, I'm going to change that and say all through the history of congregations. I heard somebody make that distinction. Church is a great thing. It's a good thing. It's God's ideas. Most of what we've done are congregations, and they have not all been great ideas. And they're usually some kind of mutant form of God's idea of church. So, but all the way through the history of the congregations, you've got conflicts over salvation, baptism, gifts, over praise, over grace, over faith, the Bible, creation, the future. It goes on and on. If there's a subject, there will be a disagreement about it, and it tends to push you back in. When you look at it all, hear it all, get flooded with it, it tends to push you back in a corner, and you just want to go hell with it. I just love Jesus. That's all I know. And that has a nice appeal to it, but it's really not quite the right approach either. But actually, we're not called upon so much as we might think to have to figure out which one is right and which one is wrong. That's not, there's a lot of times when that is not really the issue. So that's why I want to get into this. And usually the presenters who present with great amount of zeal in scripture, of course, it's usually to prove that they are right and somebody else is wrong. How many people get convinced in an argument like that? Probably a few, but it isn't that many. And you probably do more damage than good a lot of times. So I want to get into that. Now, our perception of God, the reason this is important is because the God that you embrace in your heart, the God that you trust on in your heart, whether you've got words and doctrine to wrap around that or not, the God that you confide in your deepest parts, even if you can't express it, whoever that God is, that is going to affect profoundly your life. And if you want to cop out and say I'm not forming an opinion, I don't have an opinion on that. Well, you can try to do that, but that in itself is an opinion, and it's going to affect the way you live your life. So I think basically our perception of God depends on two things. One is how we approach Him. If we're going to see who God really is, what He's like, we have to see how we're approaching Him. And I've told this story from times past because it was really precious to me, and it involved 6 hours of traveling to get it. So I need to wring every bit of juice out of it that I can. But I was called, when we were living in Georgia at Bowens Mill, I was called by a friend to go up to Atlanta and appear in his immigration hearing. He was having a hearing. He was from Colombia. He and his family, they were having a hearing to see if they would be granted permission to stay in the United States and pursue, this was several years ago, pursue the normal steps toward getting. And he was approaching the judge on a petition of political asylum. His lawyer informed him of the bad news that the judge they had been assigned was known to be the hardest judge of all the immigration judges they could have gotten. So my friend called me up and asked me if I would come up and be in the audience and be willing to testify on his behalf if I were asked to. And I said, yes, I would. So I drove the 3.5 hours up and spent the morning in the courtroom there. And they do in those days, they did to let you know how far back this was, they had a little tape recorder with a cassette, and they taped the whole hearing. And so he duly entered the time and date and the case number and who it was, and off we went. And the hearing itself probably only took about 20 minutes as their lawyer presented their plea for political asylum and why they were such a good family and so on. And after all of that, and it got down to the decision time, the judge said, I don't see sufficient evidence here to warrant a political asylum. Therefore, I'm going to deny it, and I'm giving you 60 days either to appeal that or to leave the country. End of session. And I'm sitting back there and I'm thinking, gosh, what a hard ass this guy is really. He's something else. He's just mean. And as soon as he turned the recorder off, he said, Mr. I'll just say Smith, it wasn't, but Mr. Smith, would you approach the bench, please? And my Colombian friend and his wife went up to the bench, and the woman was crying. The lawyer was actually crying, and I'm thinking, this guy's going to rub salt in the wound now, or what? He's getting another scolding. And the judge looked at them and said, Mr. Smith, I can see that you and your family are model citizens, and you are the kind of people we want in this country. You're the kind of people, the family I see you have, and your presentation to me, your courtesy, he said, I'm really impressed. You are the kind of people we want to be U.S. citizens. But the problem is, you approached me on a petition that the circumstances don't allow me any wiggle room. And if you had come at me from this angle, we could have done something. And so I would just want to exhort you now, go back with your lawyer, check these things over, see if you can't come back to me at a different angle and so on. I was stunned when I heard him say it. I thought, oh, he's not so mean after all. It's just that we chose to approach him in a way that tied his hands. So, we could have made 10 YouTubes saying what a terrible judge he was and pull out excerpts of his hard sayings, and so, or we could have made a YouTube saying, no, he's a good man. Which one would be true? Both parts were legitimate and right. So how we approach God is extremely important. We need to know that we are approaching him on, we might say, by taking our sandals off and knowing that we're on holy ground. Okay, so secondly, what light, not only how do we approach him, but what light are we shining on the situation we find ourselves in? Here's this wonderful verse, Psalm 36:9. It says, "For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light." if we're going to have a correct perception of God, we've got to have that in our hearts. In your light, we see light. Now, light is being used here to mean understanding, illumination, enlightenment. But if we only get enlightenment as we look at things according to His light. It's somewhat like if you wandered into a dark, creepy house, and it's so dark in there. There's nothing but shadows, and so you pull out your cell phone and you hit flashlight. And what are you looking for? You're looking for the light switch. You've got light to find light, greater light. And so we always have to look at whatever situation we're in, whatever God is saying or not saying, and the decisions we make by using the light that we have to find more light. And we'll talk about how that works some. So in the end of the matter, what is the light that can guide us through every situation? What is the light that can hold us through the valley of the shadow of death? What is the light with whom there's no turning and no variableness? What light is that? Well, I'm going to read you just some scriptures about that light, and please don't say duh. Just listen all the way through. And I'm going to read the same verse out of two different versions to just hopefully to kind of round out your sense of what it's saying here. And that's in 2 Corinthians 4. And then I'm going to read some very well-known verses from Hebrews 1. So I'm going to read 2 Corinthians 4:6. It started when God said, "Light up the darkness," and our lives filled up with light as we saw and understood God in the face of Christ. Bright and beautiful. Here's that same verse in another version. The God who said, "Out of darkness the light shall shine," is the same God who made His light shine in our hearts to bring us the knowledge of God's glory, shining in the face of Christ. Geez, just reading that, Jesus might as well have come and said, "Hey, I'm the light." Hebrews 1. Throughout our history, 1:1. Throughout our history, God has spoken to our ancestors by His prophets in many different ways. The revelation He gave them was only a fragment at a time, building one truth upon another. That's the cell phone light. But to us living in these last days, God now speaks to us openly in the language of a son, the appointed heir of everything. For through Him, God created the panorama of all things and all time. The Son is the dazzling radiance of God's splendor, light. The exact expression of God's true nature, His mirror image. He holds the universe together and expands it by the mighty power of His spoken word. He accomplished for us the complete cleansing of sins and then took His seat on the highest throne at the right hand of the majestic one. I never get tired of reading that verse, especially the Son is the dazzling radiance of God. So the exact expression, image. Okay, so it's all wrapped up in seeing the face of Jesus Christ. We use any light we have to get us to a place to help us approach in the right direction so we can see the face of Jesus Christ. And, and I've realized over the years that there's been this age-old debate about God. Is He good? Is He bad? Is He the mean judge? Is He the good judge? Is He, He kills whole societies. How could He be good? And on and on and on. And valid questions, but it's like it says there in Hebrews that he wanted to communicate who he really is. He wanted to reveal himself. He's always had this problem, though, that he can't trust man because man is not trustworthy. And so he has to reveal just a little bit of himself, just as much as we could take. It wasn't blow all our fuses. And so it says fragmentary revelations, and so we can kind of try to piece together something. All the prophets, all the law, all of that was fragmentary pieces. And it's like God did this for thousands of years, and then one day, that the Bible calls due time, he says, that does it. I'm just going to do it, and I'm going to show them full in the face who I am. I'm going to end the debates. I'm going to end all the ups and downs about this whole issue. All the doubts are going to flee away. I'm going to make it so clear that you couldn't miss it even if you were trying. And I'm going to show them exactly who I am. They'll never have to have another argument about whether I'm good or bad, whether I'm a judgeful God or a loving God. They'll never have to have another argument about this. And the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to send my spitting image to them. He's going to take on flesh, so he'll have a face so they can stare right in the face of God. That should end all the arguments. Whew, good deal. And he sent his son. And so there's a question. How much of his face have you seen? It tells us that everything we need to know about God can be seen in the face of Jesus Christ. You want to know about God? Look at Jesus. You want to know about the future? Look at Jesus. You want to know about the end times? Look at Jesus. You want to know about salvation? Look at Jesus. You want to know about? Look at Jesus. Everything we need to know is in the face of him. And it's not just a cheap glance. It says that when we look upon his face, the glory that is in that face, what does it do to us? It changes us. Step by step, it changes us. Okay. So how much face have you seen? We seeing God's glory. There's been a lot of in charismania. There's been a lot of wow doctrine. I went to heaven, I saw the glory of the Lord, and la 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 la. And I'm not saying that didn't happen, but it tends to be wow doctrine. It tends to be wow experiences, where I think really the experience of seeing God's glory is the woe experience. Isaiah said, "Oh, I'm undone. I thought I was done, and now I'm undone. I spent all my life trying to do, and now I'm undone." That's what happens when we run into the glory of God. We see a lot of other. It's a great experience when you see a portion of God's glory in the face of Jesus, because you're enraptured with the awesome power and life of Jesus. And yet at the same time, over in the shadows as a second footnote, is the understanding that I'm undone. I'm in real trouble here. I'm not anything like what I thought. My friends were right. I am an idiot. So, how much of his face have you seen? And how much of the veil of ignorance has been, like ripped away? And in 2 Corinthians 3, Paul uses that picture of the veil that was on Moses' face. And that veil basically was a barrier, so the people were not looking at the glory that shone on Moses' face. And there's some different ideas as to how that was really being used, but that's not our point here. The thing was that if you could take away portions of that veil, you would see more glory. And that's the situation we find ourselves in. Um, Paul goes on to talk about glory in 1 Corinthians 15, and he says some interesting things, because he says there's a glory of the heavenly, there's a glory of the earthly. Isn't that, a lot of the theologians of the early church were highly affected by Greek thought and duality, it was called, and they said that anything of the earth was degenerate and bad and corrupt. But Paul said there was a glory that belonged to the earth, and then there was a different glory that belonged to heaven. And so there's not only different kinds of glory, and there was different levels of glory, because he said, and the stars each have their glory, and one star differs from another in the glory that it has. So this glory is something, not just you package it and there it is. No, it can take on many different forms and many degrees, but it's all glory. So when we look at Jesus, we're all going to see him in different ways. We all may focus in different parts of his glory. And that's totally natural. And it's not saying that one is right and the other is wrong. It does not have to be A or B. So I'm going to read to you the verse of the glory ladder, Jacob's glory ladder, and we're going to climb that ladder. It's Genesis 28:12. It said, he had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and your descendants. So Jacob has this dream, and he sees a ladder propped up, and there's beings going up and down on that critter, and at the top, unmistakably, was the Lord. And the Lord gives him a little statement there. And so we might say that this is the ladder from the glory of earth to the glory of heaven. And I believe it's a ladder that we're to climb, because we wrote a song about that, we are climbing Jacob's ladder. But there's some, I have extensive experience with ladders. And so these are little known facts, but that I'm going to share with you, mysteries of the ladder. The first is, your hands reach out for new heights. And I hope that you're still a hungry reacher. I hope that you haven't just given up on the things of God and stopped reaching. You're always reaching, stretching for something higher. Number two is, your feet got to follow where your hands went. You can't just keep grabbing new heights with your hands and not follow with the feet. It won't work. It'll only work so far, we might say. So we get a hold of something, a greater glimpse of glory. That glory has to be interpreted through feet in one way or another. It may not be the way we thought it would, but there has to be something like that. We go one hand at a time. We go 1 foot at a time. You don't jump. There is a reaching and then an establishing, and a raising a foot and then the establishment of the foot. Every truth of God, there's the reception of it, and then there is the strengthening of it, making it viable to hold weight, viable to stand upon, a solid place. It has to happen. Another thing about our ladder is the higher you go, the more you're going to be able to see what's at the top. The closer you are to getting to the top, you're going to see, be able to focus on the task. It's not really good to be climbing a ladder and always looking down. It's not hard to get scared on a ladder. Especially you start getting up there, and if you let your mind run away with you, uh, it's pretty easy to become consumed with how high up you are and what kind of a pile of flesh you're going to end up looking like if you were to fall. So always keep your eyes above. So I thought it might be interesting just to look a second at a good ladder climber in the life of Peter. And Peter had an epic climb on the ladder. Um, and so we'll just, but here's my point that of all this I'm making. There isn't a rung that is the right rung, and the rest are the wrong rungs. They all belong to the same ladder. They're all part of the same ladder, but they all supply a different function. And once you've utilized rung number 2 to all that rung number 2 can offer you, you got to move on to 3. It doesn't mean that rung number 2 is a lie, that it's from a demon, but you've got to go on to 3 if you're going to keep climbing. So and then I'm going to give you a practical example of that. So, but looking at Peter's climb just for a second, yeah, there's a point when you're climbing a ladder where you got 1 foot on the ground and 1 foot on the first rung. People that got no foots on the rung, they're not interested in climbing. They may be milling around a little bit, but if you're really interested in climbing, the sure sign is you're going to end up putting 1 foot up on that first rung. So there is a moment in time where you've got 1 foot on heaven's ladder and 1 foot on the earth. And so you're kind of participating in sorry about that, 2 kinds of lives. Matthew 16:16, famous verses, Simon Peter spoke up and said, "You are the anointed one, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "You are favored and privileged, Simeon, son of Jonah, for you didn't discover this on your own, but my Father in heaven has supernaturally revealed it to you." Light in the dark. Peter exposes his inner being to the power, and the light brings order in his darkness. So Peter was hanging around. All the disciples were hanging around. They're following Jesus. They're going, "Hey, man, this is better than fishing," and they're interested. But they still got 1 foot on the ground and 1 foot on a rung. And something about this question of Jesus forced Peter to look at his situation, and he takes that leap. He lifts that other foot off the ground. Because in this confession that he is making implies the greatest understanding and the greatest decision of his life to commit to this, especially in the religious system he was involved in to some degree or another. And for him to say, "You're it, you're him, you're the Messiah, you're the Christ," that other foot came off the ground. He's now officially crazy. He's officially up off the ground. He's officially no longer in touch with reality. So Jesus gives him, he supports that step of faith of his and encourages him in that. And he says, "I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, realm to I will give you the keys of heaven's kingdom realm to forbid on earth that which is forbidden in heaven, and to release on earth that which is released in heaven." So immediately, having become, in a sense, a heavenly citizen, when he lifted that last foot off the ground, he's now a heavenly being. And immediately, Jesus begins to teach him in a different way. This is really important to see. I don't know how many people really understand this, but because it says, "He then gave his disciples strict orders not to tell anyone that he was God's anointed one." That was verse 20 of Matthew 16. Huh? What? I thought we were having a crusade here. I thought we were on a campaign here, and the whole the whole issue was get all excited and tell everybody that Jesus Christ is Lord. But at this point, Jesus strictly gave them orders not to tell anyone. Um, that was something they had to get. They didn't do a real good job of it, but that was something that they were supposed to keep to themselves. On rung number one, we act differently than ground zero. On ground zero, they're not going to understand this. And you might be standing on rung one with your feet, but your brain's still on ground zero, and it becomes very confusing to try to understand this. But it goes right on to say, from then on. And I just want to shout those words. From then on. From when? The minute you take your foot off the ground and you're up on that ladder, from then on, the teaching is going to change. The communication between you and the master is going to change. There's going to be a different language being spoken. From then on, Jesus began to clearly reveal to his disciples that he was destined to go to Jerusalem and suffer injustice from the elders, the leading priests, and the religious scholars. He also explained that he would be killed and 3 days later be raised to life again. That was such a problem to them. We know Peter goes, "What?" And he pulls Jesus aside and tells him, "Hey, these guys, Peter had to hop off that first rung and grab Jesus and drag him over on the ground somewhere and say, "Hey, that's not right. You got that's a crazy doctrine." And the problem was, it is the teaching that goes with rung one. After the revelation of who Christ is, that is the teaching. That's what goes. And Peter, he had rung one feet, but ground zero head. Okay, so the obviously the goal here is that whatever rung we're landing on, we want to find out what kind of mind we need to be on that rung. We need to have an understanding that coordinates, that contingent upon being on that rung. There's a thinking that goes with whatever rung we have arrived at. And it's not the same thinking that went with the rung below or the ground below. There's more light given to us. And so with that more light that's been given to us, we need to use it to illuminate the more light we need. Okay, so shortly thereafter comes the great experience where Peter, James, and John are pulled up to the Transformation Hill. And wow, what an experience that was. And not really, I mean, I'm sure it was dynamic to have that vision where I'm sure it was so real that they didn't know if it was a vision, a dream, reality. They didn't know if their whole life before was just a dream. It was, it was that real. But even above reaching up and grabbing onto that rung of this transformation, it's the light that comes from it. And there was that experience, this incredible religious experience, this incredible spiritual experience had a purpose. It wasn't just, oh man, hallelujah, we had a breakthrough. No, there was a purpose to it. I'm just one of those who's convinced that everything God does has a purpose. And 99.9% of the time, I think he wants me to know that purpose. I think he wants to renew my mind so that I understand that purpose, because it's all part of climbing this ladder and being conformed to the image of Christ. And so he puts me through an experience. It's got tacked onto it the reason for the experience. There's a note there somewhere. And if I go through the experience but don't get the lesson, it's not that it wasn't valid. It's not that it might not have helped me, but I sure didn't get God's best out of it. So, it says that they have this incredible transformation experience up there. And what was the lesson of that transformation experience? Is it all about, oh, one day we're all going to put on a glorified body, we're going to be like Jesus, we're going to be shiny and whiter than anybody could wash us, and is that it? What is the great lesson? What did God want to show Peter, James, and John by taking them up there? These guys who had kind of hopped up a rung or so more than the other 9 or whatever, or at least 1 foot, maybe 1 hand higher. What did God want to show them? The whole point of the thing comes at the very end. And it's when Peter says, with the rung below mentality, he says, dang, this is awesome. We need to make 3 churches here. We should have a church, the church of Moses, the church of Elijah, and the church of Jesus. And boom, big cloud. Thundering voice. This is my son. Hear him. So the lesson, Jesus is greater than the law and the prophets. He is not just an addition to, the greatest teacher of. He is way and above the law and the prophets. And from now on, start listening to him. Turn your focus. All the glory is found in the face of Jesus Christ. Okay, so you might be thinking, okay, yeah, I got that. I mean, yeah, that's not new. We might understand some kind of a doctrine, but we still have a mentality that's 2 or 3 rungs down. And we still, I believe there is just kind of seen it in my own life, there is almost a knee-jerk reaction to go to the law. It's so embedded in us, we don't realize how. Do you realize that the Holy Spirit basically spent the rest of Peter's life trying to work this idea into the full depth of his being? Because Peter saw it, thought he got it, had some experiences with it, got some flack for it, and for certainly then he must have understood it, but he didn't. He did not realize the scope of it. He had a fragment of it, but he did not have the scope of how big this thing was. Hear him. So for these guys, it was a very powerful experience, and you know that because Jesus says, don't tell anybody about this on their way down, and they didn't. That's something in itself. That shows that glory's been working. They kept their mouths shut. He alone is our revelation. Now, lest you think I'm kidding about that, I'm going to read you what I told you about, this audio clip that somebody sent me about a prophecy of this last time, this Colombian pastor prophesying. And the essence of the prophecy was, we're all in trouble. He had this up on the heavens experience with God, and the message God told him was literally what he asked the man a question. He asked the man, why aren't my preachers preaching Isaiah 24? So here's Isaiah 24. Behold, the Lord lays the earth waste. He devastates it, distorts its surface, and scatters its inhabitants. And the people will be like the priest, and the servant like his master, and the maid like her mistress, and the buyer like the seller, and the lender like the borrower, the creditor like the debtor. The earth will be completely laid waste and completely despoiled, for the Lord has spoken this word. The earth mourns and withers, the world fades and withers, and the exalted of the people of the earth fade away. The earth is also polluted by its inhabitants, for they transgressed laws, violated statutes, broke the everlasting covenant. Therefore a curse devours the earth, and those who live in it are held guilty. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left. The new wine mourns, the vine decays, all the merry-hearted sigh. The gaiety of tamarines ceases. The noise of the revelers stops. The gaiety of the harp ceases. They do not drink wine with song. Strong drink is bitter to those who drink it. The city of chaos is broken down. Every house is shut up so that none may enter, and they all must wear masks. No, it's not. It doesn't quite say that, but this is I think you've got the air of the sense of the chapter, the fragrance there, and this pastor said that God told him to tell God's men, his preachers, that they should be preaching Isaiah 24. And it's not hard to look at some of the things that are said there and draw many comparisons to the situation we're in today. And you can make, you could tie things, you can kind of tie things together there and present a picture. And the emotion of this fellow was very strong. I mean, we are emotional critters, and his emotion, there was a sincerity in it that was irreproachable. It was really powerful, weeping and so on. But here's where, and I read that because, you can get on the YouTube right now, and there's viral things going on there about prophecies, about unknown vessels that suddenly pop up and are having dreams and visions that seem to proclaim exactly what's going on today, and a humility and so on that goes with it that invites you to swallow the whole thing. And I'm not knocking it or anything. I mean, I enjoyed listening to the fellow, but there were some things that stuck out in my mind that I thought, that does not go with the glory that is in the face of Jesus Christ. That is an exception to that. Both in this message from this Colombian preacher and also from the popular prophecies that are going on. We have to measure all things by the Son. We don't measure things by Isaiah 24. Hear ye him. And so if there's something that we're given that doesn't match up with him, the precise image of God in the face of Jesus Christ, if it doesn't go with that, we need to give it second and third and fourth thoughts before we just open our mouths and swallow. Oh, okay, I feel better saying that, although I feel like I need to say it 10 times more. In Luke 9:35, he says, then a voice came out of the cloud saying, this is my son, my chosen one, listen to him. 43, everyone was awestruck. They were stunned seeing the power and majesty of God flow through Jesus. This is when they come down off the mountain. He casts out the demon. While everyone marveled, trying to process what they had just witnessed, Jesus turned to his disciples and said, this is very important. So listen carefully and remember my words. The Son of Man is about to be betrayed and given over to the authority of men. But the disciples were unable to perceive what he was saying, for it was a veiled mystery to them, and they were too embarrassed to ask him to explain it. Powerful experience, just powerful. It would go down in family histories telling of this great experience of this boy being delivered in the power of God and so on. But why did it happen? Well, yes, of course it happened to set the young man free. Of course it happened because the father was desperate and made cries. Of course it happened because Jesus was powerful and merciful at the same time. Yes, that happened. But then Jesus says, this is very important, so listen carefully and remember my words. And that, he says, in response to the awe that everybody is demonstrating. Dang it, I've gone 50 minutes already. I'm sorry. But might as well gone too far now. So, and then he talks, when he's got everybody's attention, sort of, then he goes right back to the real purpose why he came. He has to almost pull their minds off of the event and put in front of their brains the lesson. Okay, so we're climbing this ladder. The first run, you have 1 foot on, 1 off, and you're weighing this whole thing, and you make the decision that yes, we're going to go for it. And then on the second rung, it's like, wow, nobody ever said the things that this guy says. And the third rung, it's you discover he's greater than all the prophets put together and squared. He's not just an addition to. He's not just a final verse, the last stanza of the prophets. He is greater than the whole song. The next 2 or 3 rungs, you may learn that Judaism was on the clock. Most Christians don't get this. Judaism was on the clock. It had a timer set, and nobody was going to come and clip the red wire and the blue wire and keep it from exploding. Jesus himself was the prophet that said, it's done. It is done. The next rung up might be I was just thinking about in Peter's life, it's when they blew the corral gate off its hinges, and Peter's there inside of the corral of Judaism, but the gate's blown away. And out there is the pasture, the place, but he's been taught all his life that the pasture is defiled. It's unclean. And the minute you step out there, but see, all of that teaching was just to keep them in the corral. And Jesus comes along and puts C4 on the gate and blows the thing to smithereens. And Jesus says, rise, Peter, walk out the gate. Oh, no, Lord, I've never gone outside the gate because I know that I belong here in the corral and I should never go outside the gate. Peter, quit arguing with me. Go out of the gate. And he has some incredible experiences. It's 1 hand, 1 foot, next hand, next foot to get him all the way up there. But he goes through that experience and he comes out of there a different Peter. He's got by the time he's done with Cornelius and Cornelius' house is done with him and he touched Gentiles and lived to tell about it. And then has to face the Judaism guys. He's gone through, he's tasting some stuff now. He's moving up the ladder. And the vision of the Lord at the top is becoming clearer and clearer. And all that he went through, even then, years later, he gets stuck on the ladder. And he's still reaching for more, but he's still stuck with some thoughts about several rungs down below that there's still validity to Judaism and so on. And and Paul has to come up from behind and bump him up because it was a huge lesson to be learned. It was very difficult. A whole history had to be rewritten in his heart. So really, in a sense, every time you climb a rung, every time you go up another rung on Jacob's ladder, your theology is going to take a hit. It's going to affect your life because what we embrace ends up affecting our lives. And your theology should be taking some hits. Periodically, your theology should take some hits. Um, and here's a great wisdom for you and for me. Don't try to make 10th rung decisions on 4th rung experiences. With each rung, there is a mind, an aspect of the mind of Christ that will help you make the decisions for the next rung. Don't try to make decisions on the wisdom of rungs below. So I started this whole thing by saying, how do we discern with all these opinions out there and all these different views of everybody who are Christians and who all serve the same Lord and are all going to the same heaven and that, and yet they're so totally far apart and they're so totally different. How do you know which one is right and which one is wrong? Well, I just want to submit to you that it does not have to do with right and wrong. It has much more, although it can, but it usually has much more to do with which rung it came from. What most of our theologies and most of our doctrines and so on, I think the great difference is people on the 7th rung are going to see things so differently than people on the 3rd rung. It's just, and you can't, and the responsibility for this lies on the 7th rungers, because 3rd rungers, they don't have the option of anything more than 3rd rung understanding, 3rd rung light. And if you've gone up to the 7, you got a lot more light because the Lord of light is right there at the top and he's shining. So you see things more clearly. So you're the one who should, you should be able to see that there's no sense in debating, contending, arguing with a 3rd runger. You at least have the advantage of having been 3rd rung. And if you're really 7th rung now, you somewhere, I think shortly, not too far up, there, one of the lessons of the rungs is the servant of the Lord must not strive. I say that, but I fall into that hole myself. It's so easy to do. And when I was listening to this pastor trumpeting the values of Isaiah 24 and how we should all be out there preaching this message, my first thought was, this is a demon spirit. This is just a religious spirit that's getting a hold of him. And the effect, it's interesting, the effect that it has had on people that I know, the people who, I would just say they don't, I question whether they have a rung experience of really knowing the Holy Spirit. They've received Jesus as Savior, but it's having the effect of store up, save food, get out of the city. It's like, been there, done that. And some of you know what I mean. We've been there and done that. We've tried that route. Found out that really wasn't Jesus Christ. That was not the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Jesus, where are you going? Well, I'm going to this wilderness fort that I have where I've stored up all sorts of food, and we have some guns and ammo too. And because these are evil times, and the Romans, I promise you, the Romans are going to be here. They're coming, and we better be ready. So I at first thought that was a demon spirit, and I had an email all prepared for the fellow who sent me this thing that was affecting him so deeply. And one day it just dawned on me that, there are times like I used to come home when my kids were smaller, and I would come home from work and Dosha would say, they're waiting for you, and the boys are waiting for you in the bedroom. Here's what they did. And I used to tell her, I hate being the hitman, the assassin, because I'd come home, I'm just glad to be home. It was another day's work, and it's a good feeling when you put in your hours and you get home, and then suddenly I have to do double duty of being the assassin too. And it was hard for me to work up anger. but I had to, kind of pump it up. I had to try to put on that angry, I am so ticked off with you boys. You're in serious trouble. And, inside I'm just thinking, I just want to go sit down. So I realized, like that judge, uh, there are different ways we can approach God. And it didn't mean that he was not a judge of immigration. He was. And it didn't mean he wasn't harsh. He was. But it didn't give us the picture, though, that he was actually a kindly man who had a burden for people. When Joseph's brethren came to him with their petition for food the first time, when they walked away, what kind of idea did they have of Joseph? He is a mean, mean man. And he was accusatory and threatening and not a pleasant person. He's to be feared. Was that right or wrong? Well, it was right. Just wasn't the end of the story. And the second time they go, he has to do some things to try to dislodge some of that concept they had from their first time with him, that first rung concept. And he has them all to lunch at their house, and they have this great time. And they get a little tipsy, and they give it a bunch of grain and gifts. And they go, man, did we just had the wrong concept about this guy. He's actually a great guy. He's so generous. I feel like we're really connecting here. And then the third time, they're back in front of him as the accused and the guilty. And once again, it is a dire situation, and they're at the end of their ropes there. And then there is a moment, which of course is probably maybe the most dramatic moment in the Old Testament, when Joseph rips aside the veil and they see the glory of the Father in the face of the Son. And he says, I am Joseph. I never ceased to be impacted by that scene, because they knew him all along, but they didn't know him. And now suddenly they're seeing a whole new face. Boy, what a face, too. So the question is, did the first face they see, was that invalid? No. It was true. It just wasn't the depth. The second face they saw of the wonderful host, was that invalid? Nope. Was that a demon? Nope. What about the face of the judge who's ready to send them for the gallows for theft and betrayal? Was that a false face? Nope. He could do that too. But then came the real face. Then came the real face. And so my conclusion is, dearly beloved, that we need to be swift to hear and slow to speak and slow to act until we figure out who's where on the ladder and move accordingly. So, okay, I think I feel better about having gotten that out of my system now. It was long, I'm sorry, but you don't have anything to do, so why not? So with that, I'll bid you adieu.